There are exactly 3 things I know to be true about myself. I make the best croissants in the state of Vermont. I function at approximately 40% capacity before my first coffee. And I have the single worst luck of any human being currently alive on this planet. I am Ellie Hartwell, owner of Butter and Chaos Bakery, chronic insomniac, and as of approximately 2:07 a.m. on a Tuesday in October, apparently a wife. Welcome to Flustered Novel, where love is chaotic, confessions are awkward, and every story comes with butterflies, drama, and a little emotional damage. Grab a snack, get comfortable, and let's dive into today's romance story. Not just any wife, mind you. The wife of Dr. Callum Reed, my 6th-floor neighbor, the man who has slid precisely 14 noise complaint letters under my apartment door in the past 8 months. The man whose jaw does a very specific tick whenever he sees me in the elevator. And the man who once told the building super that my 4 a.m. stand mixer was a public health crisis disguised as a kitchen appliance. Here is what actually happened, to the best of my legally dubious recollection. I had been awake for 22 hours. I had a custom 5-tier wedding cake due for delivery at 9 a.m., ironic I know, a broken piping bag, a burn on my left forearm from a rebellious oven rack, and approximately half a functioning brain cell rattling around in my skull. When the knock came at my door, I assumed it was the flower delivery I'd been tracking. My delivery guy, Marco, always came late. Marco had a key. Marco did not knock. This was not Marco. This was a very tired city clerk named Gerald, who had apparently been sent to the wrong address by some spectacular bureaucratic failure, carrying a clipboard with a form that, in my sleep-deprived fog, looked exactly like Marco's standard delivery confirmation sheet. I signed. I handed it back. I went to bed. Gerald, bless his confused little heart, had knocked on my door instead of 6B, my neighbor Callum's door. Because our apartment numbers look identical when the hallway light on the 6th floor is flickering, building management has been notified 17 times. Callum, it turns out, had signed the first half of the marriage license earlier that evening on a bet gone horrifically wrong with his colleague Dr. Priya Shah, who had dared him to at least start the paperwork for the city's charity fundraiser mock wedding event. He had signed, meaning to void it later. He forgot. I signed the second line. Gerald filed it. The state of Vermont recognized it. And that is how I accidentally became Mrs. Ellie Reed. Or depending on how you look at it, how Dr. Callum Reed accidentally married the woman he'd been passive-aggressively at war with for 8 months over the noise ordinance, baked good smells in the corridor, and one incident involving a runaway baguette and his dry cleaning. What follows is not the story I planned for my life. But then again, the best recipes never go exactly as written. I found out I was married the same way I find out most bad news. Through a piece of paper I didn't immediately understand, while holding a coffee I hadn't yet sipped. It was Wednesday morning. I was standing in my kitchen in flour-dusted pajamas, squinting at an envelope that had been slipped under my door sometime before dawn. Official seal. State letterhead. My name. Callum's name. The word certificate. I read it 3 times. Then I ate half a croissant. Then I read it again. Certificate of marriage. Eleanor Grace Hartwell and Dr. Callum James Reed. Duly registered in the county of. I sat down on the kitchen floor. Rosie, my sourdough starter. Yes, she has a name. Yes, she has feelings. No, I will not be taking questions. Bubbled cheerfully from her shelf. The stand mixer gleamed. The morning light came through the window at a lovely golden angle, as though the universe was congratulating me on the worst decision I'd technically made while unconscious. I had 2 options. I could pretend it hadn't happened and see how long it took for reality to catch up with me. Or I could go knock on 6B and explain the situation like a reasonable adult. I knocked on 6B. Callum opened the door in a gray t-shirt and scrub bottoms, hair doing something criminally unfair for 6:30 in the morning, holding a mug of black coffee like he'd been awake for hours. He looked at me with his usual expression. That particular brand of controlled exhaustion surgeons develop after years of being the smartest, most sleep-deprived person in the room. Hartwell, he said. Reed, I said. Funny story. He looked at the envelope in my hand. His expression did not change, but something behind his eyes shifted, like a calculator quietly loading. Come in, he said. I came in. And that was how our marriage began, with bad lighting, floor-cold feet, and the mutual understanding that this was absolutely, categorically 100% someone else's fault. The problem with getting an emergency annulment, as Callum's lawyer, a very amused man named Fletcher Oakes, explained over a phone call we took together on Callum's couch, is that Vermont has a reasonable discovery window. You have to have been unaware of the error at the time of signing, Fletcher said, in the tone of a man trying very hard not to laugh. The issue is that you both did technically sign the document. One party did so knowingly, even if partially, and the state considers the filing valid pending a standard review process. How long is the review process? Callum asked. 60 to 90 days, give or take. There's a small backlog. Silence. 90 days, I repeated. Could be 60. Could also be 90, Callum said flatly. There is, Fletcher said, another option. You could file for divorce, which processes faster but does create a legal record, which, given your profession, Dr. Reed, and considering your hospital's upcoming board review, might be worth discussing. Callum went very still beside me. I had not known about the board review. I didn't know what it meant exactly. But the way his jaw did that tick, the specific one I'd catalogued across 14 noise complaint letters, told me it mattered enormously. Or, Fletcher continued, now fully not bothering to hide his amusement, you could simply coexist for 60 days, file for annulment at the windows open, and no one outside this call ever has to know. We looked at each other. I want to be clear that Callum Reed is not an unattractive man. He is, objectively and irritatingly, very good-looking in the way that people who don't seem to be trying always are. Tall, dark-haired, sharp features, the kind of hands that look like they were purpose-built for precision. He is also, I want to be equally clear, completely insufferable, overly opinionated about noise ordinances, and deeply personally offended by the existence of my 4 a.m. baking schedule. 60 days, he said. 60 days, I agreed. Fletcher made a sound that was almost certainly a suppressed laugh, wished us luck, and hung up. We sat in silence for a moment. Ground rules, Callum said, turning to me with the energy of a man calling a very boring board meeting. We don't tell anyone. We continue as normal. You keep your baking schedule, he paused, as if this pained him physically. Within reason. Define reason. Before 5 a.m., the mixer goes on low. The mixer has 2 settings. High and off. His eye twitched. Then off before 5 a.m. Fine. You stop sliding complaint letters under my door. I'll consider it. That's not a ground rule, that's a maybe. Fine. No more letters. I stood up, tucked the marriage certificate under my arm, and walked to his door. Great. Lovely chatting, husband. The look on his face was absolutely worth the entire situation. The problem with living in a 12-unit brownstone building is that 12-unit brownstone buildings are essentially small, vertical villages, and villages talk. By Thursday, our building's unofficial social committee, which consisted of Mrs. Petrov from 3A retired omniscient, the Huang twins from 4C who were both in their 20s and treated the building like a reality TV show, and old Dennis from 2B who didn't gossip so much as occasionally announce things in the lobby, had noticed that I had been inside Callum's apartment. I saw you go in Wednesday morning, said Mia Huang, appearing at my door while I was decorating a birthday cake for a 7-year-old named Jasper, and come out 40 minutes later. He borrowed flour, I said. Mia looked at me with the expression of someone who absolutely did not believe that. Callum Reed, she said slowly, who once wrote a strongly worded email to the building group chat about the pervasive smell of cinnamon in the stairwell, borrowed flour. From you. He's branching out. Ellie. Mia. She left. I went back to Jasper's cake. I piped 17 perfect stars and thought about nothing at all. What I had not anticipated was that Callum, who is precise and controlled and not prone to accidental anything, would hold open the elevator for me on Friday morning with a courtesy so deliberate it made Mrs. Petrov, who happened to be standing in the lobby, physically stop walking and stare. Thank you, I said, stepping in. Of course, he said. We rode to the lobby in silence. Mrs. Petrov got in on the second floor. She looked between us the entire ride down with an expression of intense scientific interest. In the lobby, she touched my arm. He held the elevator, she whispered. He did, I agreed. He has never held the elevator. Not once. Not for anyone. He let Mr. Chen's Labrador get caught in the doors last February. The dog was fine, Callum said from 6 feet away, without turning around. Mrs. Petrov looked at me with wide eyes. I shrugged and went to open my bakery. It started with a lasagna, which sounds like the beginning of a joke, but is in fact the beginning of the most confusing evening of my legally married life. I had made too much. I always make too much, occupational hazard, And rather than leave a lasagna's worth of food to go to waste, and because I had been raised by a woman who believed that feeding people was the foundational act of human civilization, I knocked on 6B with a covered dish and zero ulterior motives. Callum opened the door looking exhausted in the specific way he looked after a long shift. Tie loosened, sleeves rolled, the careful composure slightly worn at the edges. He looked at the lasagna. He looked at me. I made too much, I said. A beat. Come in then. That was how I ended up sitting at Callum Reed's kitchen table, which was spotlessly clean and aggressively organized, opposite of mine, eating lasagna and finding out that my accidental husband had, in his possession, the complete collected works of Terry Pratchett, a deeply impressive vinyl record collection, and an extremely strong opinion about the correct way to rest a roast chicken. You're supposed to tint it, he said. I don't tint. I rest freely. Freely. You rest a chicken freely. It needs to breathe, Callum. It's dead, Ellie. I pointed my fork at him. Emotionally, it needs to breathe. He stared at me for a long moment. Then, to my absolute shock, the corner of his mouth moved. It was barely there, a fractional, reluctant twitch. But I saw it, and I catalogued it like a discovery. Dr. Callum Reed had, somewhere underneath 6 months of noise complaint letters and elevator silence, a sense of humor. It was very small, and he kept it in a locked box, but it was there. We talked for 2 hours. About his residency in Edinburgh. About how I turned my grandmother's recipe binder into a business plan at 26. About the way his hospital's administration drove him up the wall, and the way difficult custom cake orders drove me up mine. At 10 o'clock I stood to leave. The lasagna was good, he said at the door. The company was tolerable, I said. The corner of his mouth did the thing again. High praise Hartwell. I went back to my apartment and stood in my kitchen for a full minute before I turned on the mixer, on low just until 5, and tried very hard not to think about anything in particular. The complication arrived in the form of Dr. Priya Shah, Callum's colleague, the architect of this entire disaster, and a woman who was apparently constitutionally incapable of keeping a secret for more than 10 business days. She arrived at my bakery on a Saturday morning, 5'3", immaculate blowout, the energy of someone who had just done something they were only slightly sorry about, ordered a cappuccino and an almond croissant, and then leaned across the counter and said, "So, you and Callum." I maintained a completely neutral expression. "What about us?" "He called me," she said, "to ask what the penalty is for accidentally filing a legal document." My neutral expression held. "That's a very specific question." "It is." And then I checked. She smiled. "I'm the one who dared him, Ellie. I know what he signed. And I know Gerald went to the wrong floor." I put down the milk frother. "Priya. I'm not going to tell anyone," she said quickly. "I promise. I just wanted to say that, in the 3 years I've known Callum Reed, I have never once seen him hold an elevator for a person." Mrs. Petrov texted the building group chat about it. "She did what?" She said, and I quote, "Something has shifted in 6B. Mark my words." I pressed my palms flat on the counter. "We have an arrangement. 60 days annulment done." Priya looked at me with the knowing expression of someone who had been friends with Callum long enough to read his locked box from across a room. He reorganized his kitchen after the lasagna night. "How do you know that?" He texted me to ask if it was normal to reorganize a kitchen. "What did you tell him?" I told him it was extremely normal, and that he should perhaps examine why. She paid for her croissant, winked, and left. I burned the next batch of financiers. First time in 4 years. At 40 days, the following things had happened. Callum had begun leaving his door on the latch on Sunday mornings. I found this out accidentally when I walked past and noticed, which, Mrs. Petrov later informed me, he had never done in the 18 months he'd lived there. I had, without fully acknowledging it, started making 2 cups of coffee in the mornings. We had eaten dinner together 9 times. I was counting. I was trying to stop counting. He had fixed my oven rack with a look of such efficient competence that I had to go stand in the corridor for a moment and collect myself. He had also, on one memorable occasion, come downstairs at 3 a.m. not to complain but to ask, while squinting at my mixer, whether I needed help with whatever I was making. I had been piping a 400-unit corporate cookie order. He had sat at my kitchen island for an hour, occasionally passing me things and watching with an expression I was learning to read as, "I find this chaotic and inexplicably interesting." He had not filed a single noise complaint. I had not once called him insufferable. Out loud. On day 40, we were on his couch with his vinyl playing something low and warm, and he said, without looking up from the medical journal he was reading, "The annulment window opens in 20 days. "I know," I said. Silence. "You could come to the hospital fundraiser," he said. "Next Saturday. They're expecting. Colleagues would ask questions if I came alone and they heard about." He stopped. Cleared his throat. "It would be simpler." I looked at the side of his face. The careful set of his jaw. The way he wasn't looking at me. "Sure," I said. "I'll come." He turned a page. Good. We didn't talk about it again that night. But the album played to its end, and neither of us got up to leave. The fundraiser was held at the Aldrich Hotel, which had impractical chandeliers and staff who moved with the particular grace of people paid to make rich doctors feel important. I wore a green dress I'd bought on 40 minutes of panicked online shopping, and heels that were optimistic about my coordination. Callum wore a dark suit that was clearly not a hotel event purchase, but something he just owned, which felt deeply unfair. He looked at me when I knocked on his door and said, "You look," and then stopped and said, "We should go." "I look what?" I asked. "We should go," he repeated, and held the door open with an expression that was doing everything except answer the question. At the fundraiser, I met his colleagues. Priya found us within 4 minutes, looked between us with barely concealed delight, and introduced me to everyone as Callum's wife, with the theatrical innocence of a woman who had been waiting for exactly this moment. Callum's hand found the small of my back at some point during the cocktail hour, in the way that could have been purely navigational, and absolutely was not. Dr. Okonkwo, the chief of surgery, shook my hand warmly and said, "We've heard a great deal about you, Miss Hartwell. Callum mentioned the bakery. Said you made extraordinary croissants." I looked at Callum. He looked, for the first time since I'd known him, genuinely caught. "Extraordinary," I repeated. "French-style lamination," he said with great dignity, "is technically impressive. You told your chief of surgery about my croissant lamination." I mentioned it in passing. In passing. "Can we discuss this later?" "Oh, we absolutely can." We danced once, because the string quartet started, and it would have been conspicuous not to. And because Callum put his hand out with the resigned competence of a man who has accepted his fate. I took it. We were close enough that I could see the line of his jaw. The way he was looking somewhere past my shoulder with enormous care, as though looking directly at me might constitute an admission. 20 days, I said quietly. 19, he said. It's past midnight. I pulled back enough to see his face. He looked back at me, finally, and dropped the surgery room composure entirely for exactly 3 seconds. That was enough. On the way home in the cab, our hands were close on the seat between us. Not touching. Almost. At the building door he held it open. I stepped through. He followed. In the elevator on the 6th floor I turned to him and said, "The croissants. What about them? You like them? They're technically proficient." Callum. A pause. "Yes," he said. "I like them." I went up on my toes and kissed him. It was brief. It was decisive. It tasted like champagne, and a very long time coming. He kissed me back. That was longer. That was neither brief nor decisive. It was the kind of careful, considered thing that surgeons do when they've thought about something for much longer than they've admitted. When we stopped, he leaned his forehead against mine. "The mixer," he said somewhat breathlessly, "can run until 5:30. That's a 20% extension. Don't push it, Hartwell." I laughed. He almost smiled. A real one, the full version, and it was the best thing I'd seen in months. On day 60 Fletcher Oaks called. "The window is open," he said. "Do you want me to proceed?" Callum and I were in my kitchen. He was drinking coffee at my island, his mug, the one he'd left here and stopped taking back. I was not baking. I was watching him read something on his phone, and thinking about the way he'd shown up at 11 p.m. last Tuesday with takeaway and a quiet, "You sounded tired on the phone," that I was going to think about for the rest of my life. "Give us a few days," Callum said. Fletcher made the sound of a man who had been expecting this. "Of course. I'll leave the file open." He hung up. Callum set down his phone. I set down my coffee. We looked at each other across the kitchen island. Across 60 days of noise complaints and lasagnas and low-volume mixer settings and hands almost touching in cabs, and the absolute disaster of a city clerk named Gerald who had knocked on the wrong door. "We could," I said carefully, "not file it." "We could," he said, equally carefully, not file it. That would be insane, I said. Clinically inadvisable, he agreed. We've known each other 8 months. 9 technically. You moved in September. You counted. I was documenting the noise complaint timeline. I pressed my lips together. Callum. Ellie, he said, and stood up, and came around the island with the quiet deliberateness of a man who has made a decision and intends to follow it through with surgical precision. He stopped in front of me. I would like to not file it. Okay, I said. Okay. Yes, I said. Okay. He kissed me then, with the morning light coming through my kitchen windows and Rosie bubbling on her shelf and the stand mixer gleaming like a small appliance of destiny. And I decided that Gerald the city clerk deserved an enormous gift basket, and possibly a full tier of my very best croissants. Epilogue 1 year later. The plaque outside the bakery now reads, Butter and Chaos, EST by E. Hartwell, sustained by very strong coffee and one surprisingly good surgeon. Callum did not approve the wording. He approved it anyway. Mrs. Petrov cried at our actual wedding, the one we chose, planned, and attended fully conscious, and told everyone in the reception room that she had known from the elevator. Old Dennis gave a toast that was mostly about a baguette incident I had hoped the building had forgotten. The Huang twins live-streamed parts of it without asking. Priya was maid of honor. Fletcher Oakes came as a guest and laughed for approximately 70% of the ceremony. Callum's rule about the mixer stance. Off before 5. Low until 5:30, no exceptions. I have broken it twice. Both times he came downstairs, sat at the island, and waited until I was done. Gerald, the city clerk, received a gift basket and a full tier of croissants. He sent a thank you card that said, I'm so glad I got the floor wrong. Me too, Gerald. Me too. The end. Thanks for spending time with Flustered novel. If this story made you laugh, blush, or scream at the characters, don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, and come back for more chaotic romance stories. See you in the next novel.